The rain was pounding against the cobblestones as I ran through the empty streets of Thornwick village, my torn ball gown clinging to my soaking wet body. Every step sent sharp pain through my feet where the borrowed heels had rubbed them raw. But I couldn't stop running. I couldn't face what I'd left behind at Ravenshollow Castle. When I finally collapsed against the old stone wall near the church, gasping for breath, I caught my reflection in the broken shop window across the street. There I was, Celestine Marigold Ashworth, the fat girl from the village, wearing a ruined dress that had cost more than my father made in 6 months. My mascara was streaked down my cheeks, mixing with the rain and tears, and I whispered to that broken reflection, I should have known that fairy tales don't exist for girls like me. But let me take you back to where this all began, because you need to understand how a girl like me ended up at a royal ball in the first place. Have you ever felt completely invisible in your own life? Like you could disappear tomorrow and nobody would even notice? That was me, 3 months ago, living in the shadows of my own existence, in this tiny Yorkshire village where everybody knew everybody else's business, except when it came to truly seeing me. My name is Celestine, and I've been carrying extra weight my entire life. Not just the physical kind that made shopping for clothes a nightmare and walking upstairs a huffing, puffing ordeal, but the emotional weight of being the girl everyone either ignored or used as the butt of their jokes. At 22, I still lived with my father Barnaby and my grandmother Evangeline in our little stone cottage at the edge of Thornwick village, where the lavender fields stretched out toward the horizon and the air always smelled like rain and wildflowers. Celestine, love, you're daydreaming again, my father would say every morning as I stood by our kitchen window, watching the world wake up beyond our garden gate. Barnaby Ashworth was a man of simple pleasures and even simpler words. He worked the Hendricks farm from dawn to dusk, his hands permanently stained with soil and his back permanently bent from years of labor. But those weathered hands were the gentlest in the world when he'd brush my hair away from my face and tell me I was beautiful, even when I couldn't see it myself. She gets that dreamy nature from her mother, Nana Evangeline would add from her. Rocking chair by the fireplace, her fingers never stopping their endless dance of knitting needles. My grandmother was a mystery wrapped in lavender wool and old secrets. She'd been a seamstress in her younger days, she'd tell me. But whenever I asked about her clients or where she'd worked, she'd change the subject with the skill of a magician, making cards disappear. Our mornings always started the same way. The rooster from the Miller farm would crow at exactly 5:30, and I'd hear my father's heavy boots on the wooden floors as he prepared for another day of back-breaking work. By 6, I'd be dressed in one of my 3 work outfits, loose-fitting dresses that my grandmother had altered countless times to accommodate my changing body, and heading to Thornwick Textiles, the little fabric shop where I'd been working since I turned 18. Morning, Mrs. Pemberton, I'd call out as I unlocked the shop door, breathing in the familiar scent of cotton, silk, and the lavender sachets I kept hidden between the fabric bolts. Mrs. Pemberton owned the shop, but rarely showed up before noon, leaving me to handle the morning customers and sort through the new deliveries that arrived twice a week from Manchester. I loved working with fabrics. There was something magical about running my fingers across different textures, feeling the smoothness of satin, the roughness of burlap, the delicate whisper of chiffon. Each fabric told a story, and I spent hours imagining the dresses they would become, the special occasions they would witness, the moments of joy they would be part of. Of course, none of those beautiful fabrics ever became anything for me. At my size, I was limited to whatever I could afford from the discount bins at the larger towns, and even then, everything needed extensive alterations. The worst part of my days wasn't the work or even the loneliness. It was dealing with my cousin Cordelia. She was everything I wasn't, tall, willowy, with golden hair that caught the sunlight like spun silk and a waist so tiny that men's hands could probably span it completely. Cordelia worked at the village post office, which gave her access to all the local gossip and, more importantly, all the local young men who came to mail letters or collect packages. "Oh, Celestine," she'd say every Tuesday when she came to the fabric shop to browse, her voice dripping with false sweetness, still hiding behind all those bolts of cloth. "I see. You know, if you spent half as much time exercising as you do, dreaming about pretty dresses, maybe you could actually wear one someday. You know that feeling when someone's words hit you right in the place where you keep your deepest insecurities?" That's what Cordelia did to me, week after week, with surgical precision. She knew exactly where to aim her comments to cause maximum damage, and she never missed her target. "The Hendricks boy was asking about you yesterday," she continued, examining a bolt of blue silk with practiced disinterest. "I told him you were much too busy with your fabrics to be interested in romance. I mean, honestly, what would a girl like you do with a boyfriend anyway?" I wanted to tell her that I dreamed about romance every single day, that I had an entire collection of romance novels hidden under my bed that I'd read and reread until the pages were soft and worn, that sometimes, late at night, I'd stand in front of my bedroom mirror and imagine what it would feel like to have someone look at me the way the heroes in those books looked at their heroines, with desire and love and complete acceptance. But instead, I just nodded and smiled and pretended her words didn't feel like little knives twisting in my chest. "I'm perfectly happy as I am, Cordelia," I'd reply, which was the biggest lie I told myself every single day. The truth was, I was desperately lonely, not just for romance, but for connection, for someone who saw me as more than just the fat girl who worked at the fabric shop. I wanted someone to talk to about books and dreams and all the thoughts that swirled around in my head like autumn leaves in the wind. I wanted someone to laugh with, to share secrets with, to hold hands with as we walked through the lavender fields behind my house. But in a village like Thornwick, where everyone had known everyone else since birth, I was permanently cast in the role of the sweet, quiet, overweight girl who would probably end up taking care of her aging relatives until she became one herself. There was no room in anyone's imagination for me to be anything else. That's why what happened on that rainy Thursday in March felt like something out of one of my beloved romance novels. I was walking home from work, my arms full of fabric samples that Mrs. Pemberton wanted me to organize at home, when the bottom fell out of the bag I was carrying. Bolts of silk and cotton went rolling across the muddy main street just as the afternoon rain started coming down in sheets. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," I muttered, frantically trying to gather the fabrics before they were completely ruined. The rain was soaking through my coat, and my hair was plastering itself to my face, making it hard to see. I was scrambling around, on my hands and knees in the mud, trying to save at least some of Mrs. Pemberton's inventory, when I heard a voice behind me. "Here, let me help you with those." I looked up and found myself staring into the most incredible pair of grey eyes I'd ever seen. They belonged to a man who was crouching down beside me in the rain, completely unconcerned about the mud soaking into his expensive-looking trousers. He was tall, with dark hair and aristocratic features that belonged in a painting rather than on the main street of Thornwick Village. More importantly, he was looking at me not with pity or condescension, but with genuine concern. "Thank you," I managed to stammer as he helped me gather the scattered fabrics. "I'm so clumsy. I can't believe I dropped everything like that." "The bag was clearly overloaded," he said matter-of-factly, stacking the rescued bolts with careful precision. "And this rain came out of nowhere. I'd say the circumstances were working against you, not clumsiness." He had an accent I couldn't quite place, definitely educated, with crisp consonants and perfect pronunciation, but there was something else underneath it, something almost foreign, When he handed me the last of the fabric bolts, our fingers brushed for just a moment, and I felt an electric shock that had nothing to do with the storm. "I'm Lysander," he said, standing up and offering me his hand to help me to my feet. "Lysander Blackthorn." "Celestine Ashworth," I replied, accepting his help even though I was mortified by how much effort it took for me to get up gracefully. "I work at the fabric shop, Celestine," he repeated, and the way he said my name made it sound beautiful instead of old-fashioned and awkward. "That's a lovely name. It means heavenly, doesn't it?" I nodded, surprised that he knew the meaning. Most people in Thornwick thought it was just another one of my grandmother's eccentric choices. "My grandmother named me," she said. "It was because I was born during a particularly starry night." "She has excellent tastes," Lysander said, and there was something in his smile that made my heart do a little flip. "I'm staying at the Thornwick Inn for a few weeks. Perhaps I'll see you around the village." And with that, he was gone, disappearing into the rain like something out of a dream. I stood there on the empty street, holding my rescued fabrics and feeling like my entire world had just shifted on its axis. You know that moment when everything changes, but you don't realize it yet? That was my Thursday afternoon in March. That night, I lay in bed replaying every second of our encounter. The way he'd looked at me without any of the judgment I was used to seeing in people's eyes. The way he'd said my name like it was something precious. The way he'd helped me without making me feel like a charity case. For the first time in my adult life, I allowed myself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, someone could see me as something other than the fat girl from the fabric shop. "You're glowing this morning, love," my father observed over breakfast. The next day, "Something good happened yesterday." "Just a customer who was particularly kind," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. But Nana Evangeline's sharp eyes missed nothing. She studied my face with the intensity of someone reading tea leaves. "Kind customers are rare treasures," she said slowly. "Best not to read too much into simple courtesy, Celestine." But I was already reading everything into it. Over the next week, I found myself taking longer routes through the village on my way to and from work, hoping to catch another glimpse of the mysterious Lysander Blackthorn. I learned from village gossip that he was staying in the inn's best room, that he had expensive luggage and paid his bills without question, and that nobody knew exactly why he was in Thornwick or how long he planned to stay. "Probably some rich man's son having a countryside adventure," Cordelia declared when she came by the fabric shop. "You know how they are, these wealthy types. They come to places like this to feel rustic and authentic for a few weeks, then go back to their real lives." Her words stung because they echoed my own fears. What would someone like Lysander Blackthorn want with someone like me? I was being ridiculous, building castles in the air based on a 5-minute encounter in the rain. But even knowing that, I couldn't stop hoping. My hoping paid off the next Monday, when Lysander walked into Thornwick Textiles just before closing time. I was alone in the shop, Mrs. Pemberton having left early for her weekly bridge game, and I nearly knocked over a display of buttons when I saw him in the doorway. "Good evening, Celestine," he said, and that accent of his made my name sound like music. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," I replied, quickly straightening the button display and trying to look professional. "How can I help you?" "I'm looking for some fabric," he said, wandering through the shop with curious eyes. "Something for a special occasion. I thought you might have some recommendations." I spent the next hour showing him different fabrics, explaining the qualities of each one and trying not to notice how he seemed more interested in watching me talk than in the actual textiles. He asked questions about my work, about the village, about my favorite books when he noticed the romance novel I'd been reading during my lunch break. "Jane Austen," he observed, picking up my well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. "A woman of excellent taste in literature as well as names." "Do you read romance?" I asked, then immediately felt foolish for the question. "I believe in the power of love to transform lives," he said seriously. "Don't you?" The way he looked at me when he asked that question made my cheeks burn. There was something in his grey eyes that made me feel like he could see straight into my soul. Like he knew all about my secret dreams and late-night fantasies about being someone worthy of love. "I think love is beautiful in books," I said carefully. "Real life is usually more complicated." "Is it?" he asked, stepping closer to where I stood behind the counter. "Or do we just tell ourselves that because we're afraid to believe in beautiful things?" Before I could answer, the shop bell chimed and Cordelia walked in, her golden hair perfectly styled despite the evening breeze. She took one look at Lysander and transformed into the charming, flirtatious version of herself that appeared whenever attractive men were around. "Well, hello there," she purred, extending her hand like she expected him to kiss it. "I'm Cordelia Ashworth, Celestine's cousin, and you must be the mysterious stranger everyone's been talking about." "Lysander Blackthorne," he replied politely, shaking her hand briefly before turning his attention back to me. Celestine was helping me choose some fabric. I watched Cordelia's face change as she realized that Lysander wasn't falling under her spell the way men usually did. Her smile became a little sharper, a little more predatory. "Oh, Celestine knows all about fabric," she said with false brightness. "She spends so much time with it. I sometimes wonder if she prefers cloth to people. But then again, fabric is much more reliable than relationships, isn't it, cousin?" The familiar sting of her words was made worse by having Lysander witness them. I wanted to disappear into the floor, to become one of the bolts of fabric lining. The walls where nobody would notice me or comment on my shortcomings, but Lysander surprised me. Instead of joining in with Cordelia's subtle mockery or simply ignoring the tension, he looked directly at her with those piercing grey eyes and said, "In my experience, people who truly understand beauty, whether in fabric or in anything else, tend to have the most beautiful souls themselves." The comment was clearly directed at me, and Cordelia knew it. Her cheeks flushed pink, and for once in my life, I watched my perfect cousin struggle for words. "Well," she said finally, "I should let you get back to your shopping. Celestine, don't keep the gentleman too long. You know how tired you get when you work late." After she left, the shop felt different somehow, more intimate. Lysander purchased 3 yards of midnight blue silk without really looking at it, and as I wrapped his purchase, he said quietly, "Your cousin seems to enjoy making you feel small." "She doesn't mean anything by it," I replied automatically. The same excuse I'd been making for Cordelia's behavior for years. "Perhaps," he said, "but you don't have to make excuses for people who hurt you, Celestine. You deserve better than that." No one had ever said anything like that to me before. I stood there holding his wrapped fabric, feeling like he'd just handed me something infinitely more valuable than silk. "I'd like to see you again," he said as he prepared to leave. "Outside of work, I mean. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow evening?" Have you ever had one of those moments where your entire future seems to hang on a single word? That's what it felt like standing in that fabric shop, with Lysander Blackthorne asking me on a date. Every insecurity I'd ever had about my weight, my appearance, my worthiness of love, came rushing to the surface. "I don't think that's a very good idea," I heard myself saying. "I mean, you don't really know me, and I'm not exactly ... "You're not exactly what?" he asked gently. "The kind of girl men like you usually date," I finished in a rush. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Then he said, "Celestine, what kind of man do you think I am?" I didn't know how to answer that. Rich, clearly, sophisticated, worldly. The kind of man who belonged with women like Cordelia, not women like me. "I think you're the kind of man who could have anyone he wanted," I said honestly. "Then why is it so hard to believe that what I want is dinner with you?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Part of me wanted to say yes, to throw caution to the wind and see where this impossible thing might lead. But the larger part of me, the part that had been shaped by years of rejection and ridicule, couldn't quite believe it was real. "Think about it," he said finally. "I'll be at the Rosebud Calf at 7 tomorrow evening, hoping you'll join me." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and having an argument with myself. The sensible part of my mind kept listing all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. Lysander was clearly from a different world than mine. He was probably just being kind to the local fat girl, out of some misguided sense of charity. Even if his interest was genuine, what would happen when he got to know the real me and realized I was nothing special? But there was another voice in my head, one that sounded suspiciously like the heroines in my romance novels. That voice was asking me why I was so determined to believe the worst about myself, why I couldn't accept that maybe, just maybe, someone could see something valuable in me that I couldn't see myself. "You're going, aren't you?" Nana Evangeline said over breakfast the next morning. She hadn't even looked up from her knitting, but somehow she knew exactly what was going through my mind. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but my grandmother's knowing smile told me she wasn't fooled. "The young man who was asking about you around the village," she said calmly. "The one who helped you with the fabrics in the rain. Mrs. Henderson saw you two talking in the shop yesterday, and the way she tells it, he couldn't take his eyes off you." My father looked up from his morning paper with interest. "Someone's been asking about our Celestine. A gentleman staying at the inn," Nana Evangeline confirmed. "Lysander Blackthorn. Apparently quite well dressed and well spoken. Mrs. Henderson thinks he might be from London, possibly even titled nobility." "Nobility," my father repeated, and I could hear the concern in his voice. "Celestine, love, you need to be careful with. Men like that, they're not usually in places like Thornwick for innocent reasons." "It's nothing, Dad," I said quickly. "He just bought some fabric from the shop." But Nana Evangeline was still watching me with those sharp eyes of hers. "Fabric that cost more than most people in this village spend on clothes in a year. According to Mrs. Henderson, a man doesn't spend that kind of money unless he's trying to make an impression." The rest of the day passed in a blur of nervous energy. I changed clothes 4 times before settling on my least awful dress, a navy blue one that Nana had altered to fit me properly, and that didn't emphasize my size quite as much as my other options. I spent an hour trying to do something with my hair that didn't look completely hopeless, and another 20 minutes staring at myself in the mirror, trying to see what Lysander might possibly find attractive. What I saw was a round face with unremarkable brown eyes, brown hair that never held a style for more than an hour, and a body that fashion magazines would probably classify as before in a weight loss advertisement. But somewhere in those brown eyes, I caught a glimpse of something else. Hope. Terrifying. Ridiculous. Wonderful hope. The Rosebud Calf was Thornwick's attempt at fine dining, which meant tablecloths, candles, and prices that most villagers saved for special occasions. When I walked in at exactly 7 o'clock, my palms sweating and my heart hammering, I spotted Lysander immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. And when he saw me, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Celestine," he said, standing to pull out my chair, "you look beautiful." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Beautiful. Me. But the way he said it, with such conviction and warmth, made me wonder if maybe he really did see something I couldn't. "Thank you," I managed, settling into my chair and trying not to notice how the other diners were staring at us. I could practically hear their thoughts. What is that handsome stranger doing with fat little Celestine Ashworth? "I wasn't sure you'd come," Lysander admitted as we opened our menus. "Neither was I said honestly. "What changed your mind?" I considered lying, giving him some socially acceptable answer about curiosity or politeness. But there was something about the way he looked at me that demanded honesty. I decided I was tired of being afraid, I said. Afraid of what? Of hoping for things that might not be real. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His skin was warm and soft, with long fingers that belonged to someone who'd never done manual labor. But his touch was gentle, almost reverent. What if they are real? He asked. What if everything you've been hoping for is sitting right here across from you? The conversation that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Lysander asked me about my dreams, my favorite books, my thoughts on everything from poetry to politics. He listened to my answers with complete attention, as if every word I spoke was fascinating. For the first time in my life, I felt intellectually attractive, like my mind was something worth exploring. You're remarkably well read for someone who lives in such a small village, he observed as we shared dessert. Books have always been my escape, I admitted. When the real world gets too difficult, I can disappear into someone else's story. And what would your story be if you could write it yourself? The question caught me off guard. I'd spent so much time reading other people's stories that I'd never really considered what my own might look like. I suppose I'd want to be the kind of person who makes a difference, I said slowly. Someone who matters to other people. Someone who's remembered for something other than being the fat girl from the fabric shop. You already are that person, Lysander said quietly. You just can't see it yet. By the time we left the cafe, it was nearly 10 o'clock, and the village streets were empty, except for us. Lysander walked me home, our footsteps echoing on the cobblestones, and when we reached my garden gate, he turned to face me. I'd like to see you again, he said. Tomorrow, if you're free. Why? The question slipped out before I could stop it, and I immediately felt foolish for asking. Because in one evening, you've made me feel more alive than I have in months. He said simply, because you're intelligent and kind and beautiful, and I want to know everything about you. Then he leaned down and kissed my forehead, a gentle, sweet gesture that made my heart race faster than any passionate embrace from my romance novels ever could. Good night, Celestine, he whispered. Sweet dreams. I floated into the house on a cloud of disbelief and joy. My father and grandmother were waiting in the sitting room, trying to look casual but clearly dying of curiosity. How was dinner, love? My father asked. Wonderful, I breathed, and I could hear the wonder in my own voice. Be careful, child, Nana Evangeline warned gently. Men like that don't usually stay in places like this for long. But I was beyond caring about practical concerns. For the first time in my 22 years, someone had looked at me and seen not just the fat girl from the fabric shop, but a woman worth pursuing. Someone had listened to my thoughts and found them interesting. Someone had called me beautiful, and meant it. Over the next 2 weeks, Lysander and I fell into a routine that felt like something out of a fairy tale. He would appear at the fabric shop just before closing time, and we would walk through the village together, talking about books and dreams and the 1,000 little things that make up a life. Sometimes we would sit by the stream that ran behind the church, watching the water flow over the smooth stones while he told me stories about places he'd traveled. Paris, Rome, New York City, all these glamorous locations that seemed as foreign to me as the moon. Where are you really from? I asked him one evening as we watched the sunset from the hill overlooking the lavender fields. London, originally, he said. But I've lived in many places. And what do you do when you're not visiting small Yorkshire villages? I mean, there was a pause, and something flickered across his face that I couldn't read. My family has ... business interests. Import and export, mostly. Nothing very exciting. It was a vague answer, and I sensed there was more to the story, but I didn't push. Everyone was entitled to their secrets, and besides, I was too happy to risk ruining things with difficult questions. The village, of course, was buzzing with gossip about our unlikely romance. Mrs. Henderson made sure everyone knew about every conversation we'd had in public, every touch of hands, every lingering look. Most people seemed genuinely happy for me, the sweet, shy girl finally finding love. But there were others who whispered about the strangeness of it all. Mark my words, I heard Mrs. Whitfield telling her friend at the post office, no good will come of this. Men like that don't marry girls like her. He's probably just amusing himself until something better comes along. Cordelia was less subtle in her disapproval. She cornered me at the fabric shop on a particularly busy Saturday, her voice dripping with false concern. Celestine, darling, I hope you're not getting too attached to your mysterious gentleman friend, she said while examining a bolt of yellow chiffon. I'd hate to see you get hurt when he inevitably moves on. What makes you so sure he will? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, please, she laughed. Look at you, and then look at him. He's clearly from money, probably titled aristocracy if the rumors are true. Do you really think someone like that would seriously consider a future with someone like you? Her words hit their mark, as they always did. That night, I stared at myself in my bedroom mirror and tried to see what Lysander saw when he looked. At me, all I could see were the extra pounds, the unremarkable features, the plain clothes that marked me as someone from a different world than his. But then, I remembered the way he touched my hand when we talked, like I was something precious. The way he listened to my opinions about books and politics as if they mattered. The way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, not with pity or condescension, but with something that looked remarkably like adoration. Maybe Cordelia was wrong. Maybe fairy tales could happen to girls like me. That hope became a desperate need to believe 3 weeks into our courtship, when Lysander asked me to take a walk with him after dinner. We ended up at the old stone bridge that crossed the stream, the one where village legend said that couples who kissed under the full moon would be together forever. It was a silly superstition, but as we stood there, with moonlight reflecting off the water, it felt like the most romantic place in the world. Celestine, Lysander said, taking my hands in his, there's something I need to tell you. My heart stopped. This was it, I thought. This was when he would tell me he was leaving, that whatever this had been between us was over, that Cordelia and Mrs. Whitfield and all the village gossips had been right after all. I'm not who you think I am, he continued, and my worst fears seemed to be coming true. What do you mean? I whispered. My full name is Lysander Blackthorne, Earl of Ravenshollow. My family owns Ravenshollow Castle, about 20 miles from here. I came to Thornwick because I needed to get away from my world for a while, to find something real and genuine in my life. I stared at him, trying to process what he was telling me. An earl, actual nobility. The kind of man who appeared in the romance novels I read, not in the real life of someone like me. And you found it? I asked, barely breathing. I found you, he said simply. And now I need to ask you something that might change everything between us. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an elegant ivory envelope with gold lettering. My hands shook as I opened it and read the invitation inside. The Royal Charity Ball at Ravenshollow Castle, I read aloud. In honor of the Princess of Wales's visit to Yorkshire. It's tomorrow night, Lysander said, and I want you to come with me as my guest, as my ... He paused, searching for the right words, as the woman I'm falling in love with, the world, seemed to tilt on its axis. A royal ball, actual royalty, and he wanted me there, not as a servant or a curiosity, but as his equal, his partner, his love. Lysander, I can't, I said, panic rising in my chest. Look at me. I don't belong at something. Like that. I don't have anything to wear. I don't know how to act around royalty. I'll embarrass you and embarrass myself and Celestine, he said, placing his hands on my cheeks and forcing me to look at him. You belong wherever I am. You belong at my side, whether that's in a Yorkshire village or a royal palace. Don't you understand? You've changed everything for me. Before I met you, I was going through the motions of living, following the path that was expected of me. But you've shown me what it means to connect with someone, to care about someone, more than yourself. I love your mind, your kindness, your strength. I love the way you light up when you talk about books, the way you help customers at the fabric shop even when they're rude to you, the way you see beauty in simple things that other people overlook. But what will people think? I asked, and even as I said it, I hated how weak I sounded. They'll think I'm the luckiest man in the world, he said firmly. Which I am. Then he kissed me, really kissed me, under the full moon by the old stone bridge. It was nothing like the kisses I'd read about in books or imagined in my daydreams. It was better because it was real, because it was happening to me, because it was filled with genuine emotion and acceptance and love. Say yes, he whispered, against my lips. Say you'll come with me tomorrow. And despite every rational thought in my head telling me this was a terrible idea, despite every insecurity I'd ever had about my appearance and my worthiness, despite the voice that sounded like Cordelia warning me that I was setting myself up for humiliation, I found myself nodding. Yes, I whispered back. Yes, I'll come with you. The next morning dawned grey and drizzly, matching my mood as the reality of what I'd agreed to sank in. I was going to a royal ball. Me, Celestine Ashworth, the fat girl from Thornwick Village, was going to dance with earls and dine with princesses, and pretend I belonged in a world that was as foreign to me as Mars. You look like you're going to be sick, my father observed over breakfast. Maybe I am, I admitted. Dad, what am I doing? I can't go to a ball at a castle. I don't know how to be around people like that. You know how to be yourself, he said simply. And from what I've seen, that's exactly what this young man fell in love with. But what will I wear? What will I say? How am I supposed to act? Before my father could answer, Nana Evangeline appeared in the kitchen doorway, carrying something I'd never seen before, a large, elegant dress box tied with silk ribbon. I think it's time you knew a bit more about your family history, child, she said, setting the box on the kitchen table. And time I shared something I'd been saving for, a very special occasion. With shaking hands, I opened the box and gasped at what I found inside. It was the most beautiful dress I'd ever seen. Layers of midnight blue silk that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light, with delicate silver embroidery that looked like stars scattered across a night sky. The bodice was fitted but elegant, designed to flatter rather than hide, and the skirt flowed like water. Nana, I breathed, where did this come from? I made it many years ago, she said, settling into her chair with a look of satisfaction. For a client who never came to collect it. I've been keeping it all these years, waiting for the right moment. But it's so beautiful, so expensive looking. Who was the client? My grandmother was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the silver embroidery with obvious affection. Your mother, she said finally. The words hit me like a physical blow. My mother had died when I was 3, and we rarely spoke about her. I knew she'd been beautiful, that she'd loved my father deeply enough to give up her comfortable life to marry him, but that was about all I knew. Your mother came from a very different world than this one, Celestine, Nana, Evangeline continued. Her family had money, position, connections to society that you can't imagine. When she fell in love with your father and chose to marry him, they disowned her completely, cut her off without a penny, and forbade anyone in their social circle from acknowledging her existence. I sank into my chair, trying to process this revelation. So I have family. Rich family. Had, my grandmother corrected. Your mother's parents died years ago, and their estate went to distant cousins who probably don't even know you exist. But the point is, you have as much right to move in those circles as anyone else. Noble blood runs in your veins, child. Even if you've never known it, the dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for me. When I stood in front of my grandmother's full-length mirror, I barely recognized myself. The midnight blue